ഞങ്ങളിവിടെ ആർക്കിടെക്ചറൽ ടൂറിനാണ് പോകുന്നത്.
Ice cold bottles of water in the car. You can find soda pop, beer, wine, and it's cocktail, vodka lemonade, rum punch, margarita, tequila sunrise, mimosa, slice of butter, even hot cup of coffee. Whatever you need.
ജോൺസൺ, കാത്തി, പപ്പ, മമ്മി എല്ലാവരോടെയും Chicago architectural tour, a long awaited vacation tour. It will come back, the boat will come back here?
Yeah, we're gonna come right back.
Okay, yeah.
So what's going to happen today is we're going to see some spectacular buildings. We're going to hear all about their history and their architecture and how they came to be made. But you're also going to hear a little bit Shore Drive Bridge, the largest of our Chicago-style bridges. Now, DuSable Lakeshore Drive, this highway right here, is sort of the scenic route of Chicago. It's a beautiful drive that goes all along Lake Michigan. Also, you can see here the little lakefront path here. That lakefront path extends 18 miles north. You can even go for a bike ride. It's a really amazing part of the city. But speaking of amazing, the first of many spectacular views is going to pop out before your very eyes in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and boom! There she is. So, first up on our architectural journey is over here on our left. It's one of our tallest, one of our newest, one of my absolute favorites, and that's the very tall, very wavy St. Regis over here on the left. Ooh, see that empty row up there? That is called a blow-through floor. A blow-through floor. How it works is, instead of windows or apartments, you leave a big empty row near the top of the tower, so the wind can blow right through the building, which makes the building absorb less wind, and that will thus stabilize it during any building sway. This is one of 3 ways you will learn today. Tower, it has about 200 amazing hotel rooms. The hotel finally just opened a couple months ago, and the rooms start at $700 a night. It has about 400 condominiums. The condos range in price from $1 million for a 1-bedroom apartment. That's where I live. To a $20.5 million condo that has 4 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 2 floors, the top of the middle tower, about 8,000 square feet. But hey, just so you all know, okay, little real estate scoop here. There are some unsold units left in the St. Regis throughout the tour here tonight. But speaking of hotels, on our left is the Swiss Hotel, this metal and glass triangular building here. The Swiss Hotel is a design by Harry Weiss. Now, Harry Weiss, he was a pretty influential architect who worked in Chicago a lot a few decades ago, and he loved triangles. He was obsessed with triangles. He put that shape into just about all his buildings. So if you see another triangular building on this tour or around Chicago, same architect, Harry Weiss. But I love the trio of these 3 buildings next to each other. The triangular building, the boxy building, and then that kind of wavy building behind that. I think that's a great little introduction to the way that buildings are always speaking to each other in these interesting ways nowadays. You can always find how they complement each other in terms of style, shape, how they fit into their surrounding environment. We'll talk a lot about that today. How buildings, they don't stand alone, but they form this larger kind of woven tapestry of architecture that make up an entire city. And as we sail up and down the Chicago River today, you're going to see plenty of people on the sides of the river enjoying the river walk, walking on these bridges, going to work, going home. We have 2.7 million people who live in the city of Chicago. 2.7 million makes us still the 3rd largest city in the United States. And we have about 10 million people who live in the surrounding Chicagoland. It was modeled after La Giralda, which is a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. That clock tower up there is similar to the top of this cathedral that you can see in Andalusia in southern Spain. Now, there are 250,000 glazed terracotta tiles of cream and white in 6 different shades. Terracotta is a material softer than porcelain that must be hand-washed with soap and water every single year. Now, this is what we were doing in the 1920s, in the early 20th century here in the United States. We were copying all these European styles of architecture. In the early 1920s, the US didn't really have its own identity in architecture yet, so we were just kind of copycatting Europe, and it wouldn't be until later on in the night you can actually see it from the river. But in the meantime, as we cross underneath the Du Sable Bridge ahead of us here, named after Jean-Baptiste Point-Sable, the first Chicagoan who I will tell you about at the end of the tour. We're going to cross underneath Michigan Avenue here. Now, Michigan Avenue, arguably the busiest street in downtown Chicago. This goes right through the heart of the Loop. If you go north on Michigan Avenue that way, that's the Magnificent Mile, so that's lots of magnificent shopping. You go south down Michigan Avenue that way, you'll reach Millennium Park pretty soon. That's where the Bean is. You'll get the Art Institute, Grant, for the rest of Grant Park, lots of amazing stuff up and down Michigan Avenue. Now, while we're stopped here waiting for this boat to move, a little more about the Wrigley building. So, fun fact, that is the same Wrigley as in Wrigley Field, of course, as in Wrigley Chewing Gum. And the chewing gum company, Wrigley Chewing Gum Company, originally actually made soap, and then they made baking powder. But they had this promotion at the 1893 World's Fair, which was held here in Chicago. They had this promotion to include 2 free pieces of gum with each can of baking soda, and they just made baking powder rather. And that was so successful, they just dropped everything else. They made chewing gum ever since the Wrigley building we just talked about. That second patio corresponds to the height of that circular building on the right, Marina City, that we'll talk about in a moment. And then that third patio, local favorite, these iconic circular towers on the right, called Marina City. Marina City to our right. Now that's the official name of the building, always has been since the 1960s, Marina City. The unofficial nickname though, for a lot of Chicagoans though, has always been the Corncob Towers, which is such a weird nickname. I wonder where they got that. Fine restaurants, shops, a swimming pool, a skating rink, a bowling alley, a movie theater, and of course at the bottom, parking, a key essential to. But let's ping pong across the river to a totally different style in this tall glass building with crisscross panels of white granite. That is 77 West Wacker. If you look up at the top of that building, you'll notice these kind of Greek style temples. So this is a style of architecture called neoclassical. You take this classic design, like the Parthenon in this case, and then you just kind of update it using all these modern materials of glass, steel, granite. Architecture follows 2 big trends that I notice. One, copying, and now you can enjoy the river like never before. You can go for a walk, a jog, have a drink, eat lunch. It's really become a focal point of downtown now, is the riverfront. Speaking of the river, Chicago is here today. We are all here today because of this river. The Chicago River is the waterway that connects the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River. That is why Chicago was built where it is, because the mouth of this river meets Lake Michigan, where we started the tour, and then continues all the way to the Mississippi. We were this really big shipping canal in the US, particularly in the early 1800s. And we've just been kind of a center of trade, center of commerce, ever since that time period. And that all traces back to the location of the river. The L train, that stands for elevated train. Elevated train. Polished Indiana limestone tan color, gold details at the top and the bottom. This was a style for the roaring 1920s, ornate, elegant, ostentatious. If each generation sort of takes their values and expresses them in 3 dimensions through architecture, then the merchandise Art Deco were expressing the luxury, the optimism, the hope for the future of the roaring 1920s, which, as we all know, came to a roaring halt. But we will get to that later, because we're about to enter one of my favorite spots on the river. Nearly 360 degrees of pure glass skyscraper. Let's start on the left with the Nuveen building, this curvy green building here. The Nuveen building is another example of contextualism, because you'll notice that this curve in the building mimics this curve in the river. And the blue glass matches the blue of the sky when it's not so cloudy, and the turquoise matches the green of the river. So that is contextualism as well. You're trying to blend in with the natural context. In this case, it's this beautiful green river. Now straight ahead of us are these dueling glass buildings of interesting shape. So the one on the left with that Y-shaped base at the bottom, just put a pin in that one, we'll talk about it in a few minutes. But straight ahead of us is going to be River Point from 2017 with the spiraling red sculpture in front of it. River Point from 2017 with those arches at the top and bottom. I have started calling this one the Hot Pocket building. or the ticket building, or the deodorant stick building, or the McDonald's pie box building, whatever it looks like to you. But that archway at the bottom, really important function. It's so that the building's caissons, the foundations of the building, that they don't interfere with the Metro and Amtrak train lines that go right underneath the building. Those Metro and Amtrak trains different than the L trains that you've already seen. Now that's a very new building, it's just 6 years old, but let's look at the oldest building on the river. Dead ahead, this reddish building there called Fulton House. Fulton House was built in 1898. 1898. And the city of broad shoulders after our very strong meatpacking workers. They would bring all this meat to that building, freeze it there, and then ship it across the country on trains like the ones that used to run on the Upraise Bridge. Speaking of this bridge, this is the Kinsey Street River, very, very industrial, lots of factories and stuff like that. And so people didn't really want to be down here. Now, you can start to see that kind of old attitude towards the river over here on the right in the East Bank Club. The East Bank Club is a pretty swanky fitness club. It is a gym, very nice gym. And you'll notice it looks like we're looking at the back of the building. That is because we are. It's almost like it's treating the river as its alleyway, turning its back on the Chicago River. But that was the old attitude. Nobody wanted to look at the river, let alone live on it. But as you can see, over on the left, coming into view here are all these beautiful townhouses. There's other condo buildings. There are definitely a few people who want to live on the north branch of the river now. So this river here, it's really bouncing back in this beautiful and beautifying way. And our relationship to the river is changing as the health of the river continues to improve. And we'll talk more about that later. This is 150 North Riverside, 150 North Riverside, also from 2017. And that Y-shaped base is for two reasons. Number one, once more, so the building's caissons, the foundations of the building, that they don't interfere with the Metro and Amtrak trains that run right underneath the building. But number two, the city has a rule nowadays for a 30-foot setback for a river walk for all the new buildings that get built by the river. Very important to us in Chicago to keep our waterways, the river, the lake, open and clear for pedestrian access. Bank of America building finished in just 2021. This is the newest completed building on the river. Now they also had to deal with that 30-foot setback for the Riverwalk requirements, and they did so in a pretty creative way. They used these huge tripod legs to vault the building in midair. Those are huge steel I-beams taking on tons of weight to suspend the building by its third floor, maximize all the office space, and create another lovely Riverwalk area. So I love the Riverwalk rule. I think it's really great urban planning because in addition to creating pedestrian walkways, it also makes architects and engineers work in really creative ways to find very cool solutions that end up looking. We're all built in chronological order, and they really demonstrate the evolution of architecture, not only here in Chicago, but across the United States. First up on your right, 229, the stock market, boom, it crashed. And we entered the Great Depression. And there is a virtual freeze on the building of office buildings from 1930 to 1957. Over 25 years of really no building offices across the US. But when we reboot architecture in the late 50s and 60s, we jump right into black box modernism, which you can see coming up on the right here in Gateway Centers 1 and 2, black box modernism. Now the father of this black box style was a man named Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe, a very famous German-born but Chicago-based architect who said, less is more. Less is more. So I think there is kind of an elegant simplicity to black boxes. Dark, stark, more cheap and easy to make. These buildings, I think, are more functionally beautiful instead of being all that aesthetically beautiful, right? But I mean, why'd they build like that? How do we go from a fancy Art Deco style to building simple boxes? Well, this was again the post-Great Depression generation. These people were more naturally thrifty. They were always worried about another big financial crash. They didn't want to waste money on a fancy office building with a bunch of statues and columns and gold. They said offices, hey, offices are machines to work in. So keep it simple. That's what they did. That's why they built over 60 of these black boxes in just Chicago alone. If you walk around Chicago, you will start noticing black boxes all over the place. Almost like every block has its own little black box. But let us just go on to the groovy 1970s with the international style of Gateway Center 3 on the right. So, in the 70s, all right, we're still building boxes, but now they can have a little more style in the form of precast concrete, stone cladding, and the buildings could even be, wow, white. Very exciting. Whole new color for these architects play around with. Now, we call white boxes, though, the international style because millions and millions of people, they went home after the fair across the country, across the world, raving about this beautiful, newly rebuilt city called Chicago that was right in the middle of the U.S. Speaking of world class, if this building to the right looks familiar to you, hello other boats. I hope you enjoy your boat ride. If this building looks familiar to you to the right, it might remind you a bit of the Corncob Towers we saw earlier at Marina City. That's because this is its sister building. This is River City. River City, another curvilinear, circular design by Bertrand Goldberg. The idea, again, you can have everything you need and you can live right on the Chicago River. I especially love how it just kind of spirals outward, almost in this kind of corkscrew or a question mark shape. Such a unique design. That's why Bertrand Goldberg, the architect of both buildings, I think he really created his own style of architecture here in the Windy City. But we have now and then we've got the lady, the Chicago Board of Trade building over there on the right with the statue on top. Starting there. So that's the Chicago Board of Trade building with that statue. It's another great example of Art Deco. So deep dark windows, soaring vertical lines, Indiana limestone, tan color, and then that beautiful statue. That statue is of Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture. She's on there because they used to trade agricultural commodities on the floor. It was surpassed by so many buildings, including eventually 311 South Wacker, this pink building ahead of us with those huge barrels. So those barrels, to this day, they light them up at nighttime, really 1990s. This is kind of a weird story, where they used to light up these barrels so intensely bright that they were confusing the migration patterns of birds. So the lights used to be so incredibly bright that birds thought that that tower was the moon, and they would fly into the building, fly around the building, and then get tired. Terrible, awful. Listen, we in Chicago, we love our bird friends, and we learn from our mistakes. So nowadays, we actually do dim the lights on that building and every single building in Chicago to allow birds safe migration during migration seasons, which is very Midwestern nice of us. But enough about birds. We've now reached the one, the only, the tallest tower in all of Chicago, the Sears or Willis Tower. So let us rewind to 1974. Sears department store builds the tallest building in the world at the time. Here in the Windy City, you're going to deal again with building sway. So to bring down the sway, they simply built in one, 3 buildings by 3 buildings in a grid. The concept is called bundled tubes, bundled columns. So each column is a perfect square, and you bundle them together, shorter to taller. You'll see it very clearly right after we go underneath the bridge. So on the left is that shorter tower, and then it goes up in the center to a taller tower, back down on the right to a shorter tower, back up to a taller tower, and so on, sort of spiraling upward to the 2 tallest towers. And that simple design braces the entire building against the wind. Now that made that the tallest building in the world for 24 years at 1,451 feet, 442 meters, 110 floors. Tallest on the planet. Spiraling patios, it's just double the size because it was designed by the same architect, Adrian Smith, who is from Chicago. Full circle. So that's why in Chicago we like to say that while we no longer have the world's tallest tower, we do still have the world's tallest architect, which is cool. Now, okay, the Sears Tower or the Willis Tower, which name is correct? Very controversial. So Sears, he was called free soloed the face of the Sears Tower with his bare hands using just the window ledges. And he did it in a little over 1 hour. And so for that, we call him the French Spider-Man, and we also call him Nuts. Yes. I want to talk about a Chicago nickname that I have mentioned already, and I'm sure you heard it before today, and that is, of course, the Windy City. The Windy... See, back in the 1800s, Chicagoans loved to brag about Chicago. Enormous Art Deco building with some Roman details on the front of it there. Like the way that they spell building, you'll notice that it looks like it has a V there instead of a U letter. That's because in Latin, they didn't use the U lettering. It looked like a V. So it's to make it have this kind of Roman opera house look. Home nowadays to the Lyric Opera of Chicago. Lyric Opera of Chicago, one of over 200 theater companies that call Chicago home. Chicago is a huge theater city, big hub for the arts in general. Like I said, in addition to being a tour guide, I'm also an actor, and I really recommend seeing a play here, seeing live music, seeing a comedy show. We have amazing live art in Chicago, so definitely take advantage of that. By the way, does anyone smell chocolate? Okay. Yes. Good, I'm not going insane. Yes, so there's actually a chocolate factory. There's a chocolate factory not pretty far from here. It's a little bit west. This chocolate factory is called Blummer's Chocolate. So on a breezy day, you can get these delicious chocolatey aromas. Now I want to talk to you about the actual name Chicago. I've talked about nicknames, the second city, the Windy City, but I want to tell you about the actual name Chicago and where it comes from. So the name Chicago comes from the Potawatomi people. It's nothing but this big exposed exoskeleton of a building. But brutalism, very important style from the 60s. You'll see this in banks, courthouses, government buildings. Concrete, a very sort of easy material to make things with in some cases. You can see some interesting brutalism once more on your left though. The Marina City corncob towers are also not all brutalism, you know, quite so brutal looking. They do have some beauty as well. You just gotta look for it. But to look for beauty, look no further than that skinny Art Deco building. 1 second, folks. So many. There is Chateau Carbide, Tanta, Cindy's. If you want more recommendations on that, ask me later. But ahead of us is the Chicago Tribune Tower. On your left, you can see that very iconic peacock over there. That is home to NBC Tower and NBC Studios Chicago. Now looking at that building, I know we're all experts now. You see the deep dark windows, the vertical lines, the Indiana limestone tan color. You're like, that is Art Deco, nailed it. But that building was actually built in 1989. It is a style called optical illusion, like it's playing a trick on your... And they dug so deep into the ground that they used gravity to permanently tilt and reverse the direction of the river. So that nowadays, clean, mean, green Lake Michigan water flows down the Mississippi. Again, going back to the idea I mentioned before, we want to keep our waterways, the river and lake, open and clear for pedestrians, for everyone to enjoy. So no towers are allowed, except some tricky developers in the 60s basically found some loopholes in the zoning laws that have since been closed, which is why this will probably be the only tower ever built so close to the lake. But as you can imagine, it's a pretty popular place to live. Some past famous residents of Lake Point Tower have included Halle Berry, Alice Cooper, Sammy Sosa, Goldie Hawn, Kurt Russell, Scottie Pippen, even Tom Cruise have once lived in that building. Now I want to talk to you about one more thing. We're going to pull into the dock real soon. We'll get you off this boat, hopefully before the rain. But I want to talk to you about one more thing, and it's about a human being named Jean-Baptiste Pont-Zousab. Jean-Baptiste Pont-Zousab. Okay, that's the best French I'm able to do. We also call him Jean-Baptiste Pont-du-Sable. Du-Sable was the first non-indigenous settler of Chicago. He's the island of Haiti, we believe, Haiti, making him also the first immigrant to Chicago. And Du-Sable established a trading post in this area in the 1780s. That's about 50 years before Chicago becomes a city. Du-Sable establishes this trading post that becomes sort of my last thing that I'd like to talk about is about our city's first Chicagoan, our founder, because I think he's a really important part of the city that a lot of people don't know about, this guy from Haiti. And so that's why a lot of things are named after him here. There's the Du-Sable Bridge. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And once more, just remain seated. Please remain seated as we pull into the dock. We'll get you off this boat yep. We're gonna get you off this boat very quickly. And very important announcement. Please do not run. Please do not push. Please be very calm as you exit the boat. As I'm sure you all will be, but just to say, please exit calmly. And we'll get you off this boat in just a few seconds. So just for now, please stay seated and we'll get you off the boat very soon. Thank you so much. Again, remain seated. I'll be at the top of the ramp if you have anything for me or you want to chat.
Ricky, if you could disconnect it so nobody like clotheslines themselves, pull it out.